Good morning. Welcome to the Sativa segment. This is your host, Richard Chang. Today we are filming episode 5 of the Sativa segment. Before we get into it, I would like to acknowledge that Dads at Peace is fueling this particular episode. Dads at Peace is a men's resource center that's based in Dallas, Texas. And if you want to find out more about Dads at Peace, go to the Dads at Peace page on Facebook. So today we're going to talk to someone on the consulting side of cannabis. So a little bit different than the past. His name is Travis Merchant. I've known Travis for a little while now, and we've had an opportunity to work on a couple projects together. Welcome, Travis.
Hey, Richard, how are you today?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you can make the time to make it onto the show. Thank you for the shirt. So for those of you who are watching, I'm wearing the gift that Travis bestowed on me this morning. It's an Indica consulting shirt. And, of course, you're with Indica, right?
Absolutely. And those shirts were hot off the press. I got them in stock yesterday. So
That's awesome.
You are the very first person to receive one.
Well, I am highly appreciative of it. So let's talk about you, okay? Let's start off with just talking about you. I've known you for a little while now. We've had an opportunity to work on a couple of things together. Mm-hmm. You're, of course, a client of my we've been working together for a little bit, but tell me a little bit about how you got into the cannabis industry, and tell me a little bit about where you're from, and that may help the audience understand about your background and obviously how you built your company.
Absolutely. I've got a pretty diverse background, actually, as far as kind of not only how I arrived in the industry, but how I came back into the industry. Okay. I've been in it for a long time. I planted my first plant back in 1989. But my family and how I kind of grew up was traveling. My father was a traveling salesman, so I was literally born on the road, traveling through North Dakota on the way to South Carolina, and I've lived in over 40 states in the United States. So continually moved, continually did that. So I got to see a lot of the country and experience a lot of the different environments. And being in the cannabis industry, in the legacy world, got to live across all different aspects of the supply chain. In addition to that, my white label life that I lived was working in a lot of really highly regulated industries. So initially, I worked in actually tobacco, alcohol, things like that. So worked on programs that were developed to kind of help those type of companies be able to operate compliantly, but be able to do that through a method of being able to generate revenue and really focusing on kind of market concepts. Go ahead.
Okay, so let's take a few steps back. First of all, it's always interesting to meet people from the legacy side, right? I don't know if you saw my last episode. I had a gentleman from that side as well. It's because this is an industry that's evolved over time.
Absolutely.
It certainly has evolved since even the short amount of time that I've been in it compared to someone like you. But I guess let's back up to 1989. What compelled you to plant your first plant? Let's talk about that.
I was initially fascinated with the plant itself, but I wanted to create initially I wanted to be able to not have the cost of having to spend money to grow or to buy and have product. So I wanted to learn on my own how to grow a high quality product and be able to do that for myself. And then in the first aspects of doing that, I became so fascinated with optimization and trying to understand how can I be better, how can I grow better, how can I grow larger, how can I do these things, and it kind of my brain naturally followed kind of a process of how do I scale. And that was where, again, initially it was just about figuring out about something I love, a hobby, something that I enjoyed, but it turned into an all-consuming passion. And really, ever since, my mind has always been around kind of figuring out ways to make things better.
So, just for the record, you do consume, or you did consume at that time?
Absolutely.
Okay. So you got into it, let's be honest, you got into it on because you wanted to consume?
Yep.
Okay, so where was this? What state were you in?
At that state, I was in California.
Okay, so are you? Well, you lived in 40 different states. Which, by the way, for the record, people always tell me that I've lived in a lot of states, I've lived in 8 different states, which is a lot for the average person. But you have me beat by a mile, right? 40 different states. Where did you actually grow up the most?
The most would be in actually Minnesota, in Minneapolis. I came back there several different times and spent quite a bit of time, of all the places to be, yeah.
You know, I practiced in Minneapolis
I
for 3
do,
years.
as a matter of fact. Yes, I know,
Okay.
I did that, and that's another
So
time.
I have something going on in Minneapolis right now for my legal practice.
Fantastic.
Okay, that's fascinating. I actually, after all these years of knowing you, I didn't know that you spent any time in Minneapolis. But okay, so you spent a lot of time in Minnesota, spent some time in California, along with 38 different other states. You grew, you started growing in 1989, which is a long time ago. Tell me how it progressed from there. And let's fast forward a little bit to, let's just say, in the last 10 years.
Sure. Well, I had one of my focuses or one of my specialties was outside of the cannabis industry was experience. Having as far as what an experiential event is kind of like. So I did with everything from production events to also working with retail chains to working with banking to working with things like that to really create that consumer experience. And I ended up being pulled from the audiovisual industry, which I was working in, and I happened to be the national account manager for an organization called Infocom, which is the largest global trade organization for AV and IT. And I was lured into the fintech and banking world because the banking world was very stodgy, and going into a branch of a bank was just like it was 30 years ago. You stand in line, you wait, it's very boring. And they wanted to create them and make them more like Apple stores or kind of create that environment. So I helped work into that. I happened to be working for a California company that wanted to go into Texas. So I had moved from, at that time, Minneapolis, and moved down to Austin, back to Austin. I'd lived in Austin back in the late 90s and early 2000s. But I went down there, and it's funny that I'd gotten so burnt out trying to not only work in very high-stress jobs, but also in the financial and the banking world, and the banking world inside of Texas, which is an extremely good old boy network. It's very close, very tight, trying to represent a California company. It was just an exhausting couple years. And I remember it was my birthday. I remember waking up that morning and just being so downtrodden and going, what in the world am I doing? I don't like this at all. What do I like? Boy, I miss cannabis. And I started Googling, and I thought, what in the world's going on in Texas? And this was back in 2014 or 2015. Like, what's actually happening in Texas?
That was shortly after I got involved.
And that was, I remember coming across you, but I also remember coming across Patrick.
Yep.
And starting to have conversation, and that was initially my reconversion into the legal side was coming together and helping to build a consulting IoT technology component for that company that had brought me in. So I helped them launch that, helped them bring that to market, ended up representing at the time, one of the most forward-thinking LED lighting companies that we'd actually helped bring from Europe over to the U.S. And started working with organizations all over the United States, or all over North America. Ended up working with 8 of the big 16 in Canada to initially begin with. And that was kind of what drove me to it, but it was literally just waking up one day and saying, where's my passion at? Why am I doing what I'm doing if I don't enjoy it? And I realized that was cannabis, and I decided at that moment I was going to I was joining the legal industry, and I was going to make that what I did, and I never turned back.
Yeah, no. So it sounds like it was where you are today was really accumulation of all these different life experiences, because you've mentioned white labeling, you've mentioned alcohol, you had some transitions along the way. Got into LED lighting. I'm sure it was pretty invaluable being in different segments within the cannabis industry, because as you and I both know, it's a very supply chain driven industry.
Very much
right?
so.
You have upstream, you have downstream, you have midstream, you have ancillary third parties that's around, which you and I are kind of in that ancillary space, right? Because we're the third parties that help facilitate the industry itself. So what other experiences did you have, do you think was critical to your growth?
Sure. I think, oddly enough, one of them, I was also a touring musician for a period of time, and learning the concept of tour management and production management, because much like in an operation, a cannabis operation, there are things that are going on all the time in all different directions, and some days you could have 20 different fires coming at you, and being able to deal with those quickly and understand that and be able to think on your feet and come to fast solutions that maybe are based around experience versus research, or maybe it's around research and experience to solve those things. But that's one aspect, is being able to see kind of a big 360 view, or maybe an over the horizon view of what happens, the ripple effects that come from it, and being able to be prepared for it. And so the music world really honestly helped me with that kind of mentality of being able to kind of approach those things.
Do you think the cannabis industry is a fast-moving industry or a slow-moving industry?
I think it is both in a couple different ways. I think every day it is, again, that experience, at least from an operator standpoint. In an average company or an average business that's outside of the cannabis industry, you might talk to them, how was your week? Oh, it was good. Well, Tuesday this thing happened, and boy, that was tough, and that got me through. It really kind of threw me off for the week. When you talk to somebody in the cannabis industry, how was your week? Oh, well, Tuesday morning this happened, and Tuesday afternoon this happened, and Thursday. So you got 30 different massive things that are coming at you to deal with. So it feels very fast, and it feels like there's constantly something that you're having to address, approach, deal with, solve. But when you talk about a lot of the momentum of the industry, there's a lot of momentum, but there's still a lot of different dams in the way of that stream. When you talk about it, that slows things down an awful lot.
Right. So that's really where I was getting at, is that it's a dichotomy of the two, right? Is that on one hand, the laws, and of course, being an attorney, I'm looking at it through my lens, is that things change so quickly from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and sometimes even on the local level. But then conversely, it moves so slowly in other areas, right? I.e. federal legalization. Okay, I'm just using that as an example.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And then when I speak with my clients, it seems like they're moving 100 miles an hour, but yet they're not in other ways. So it's a fascinating dynamic there. So let's talk about your business partner. Who's your business partner?
My business partner is Carsey Merchant, as a matter of fact. So.
And who is Carsey Merchant to you?
Carsey is actually my wife.
Okay, so you chose your wife to be a partner.
We did.
Okay,
yes, we chose.
And well, first of all, that doesn't always work out with everybody, but it seems like you guys have really made it work.
Yeah, we are very fortunate to get along extremely well in business and in our personal lives. But we'd initially met. If it's okay to talk about it, we'd initially met at MJ Biz, and we were both working in the industry. We happened to meet there, realized that we had extremely complementary skill sets and knowledge sets. And when we started talking, we realized that we knew an awful lot of not only similar people, but people that we both needed to know that maybe we didn't know. And we started working on some projects separately and together. She would bring me into a project, I would bring her into things, and we started doing that. And after a while, I realized not only how amazing she was, but I fell in love with her. And the following MJ Biz, I actually asked her to marry me. So that was...
Wow. Well, so love conquers all.
It does. As a matter of fact, it does.
What a beautiful story. So she's your business partner. Now, what is she good at that complements what you... I mean, really, what do the two of you... bring to the table that makes Indica what it is?
Yeah, that's a great question. Carsey's strengths, to begin with, she's brilliant. Probably the smartest person that I've ever known. Her mind consumes compliance knowledge and operational knowledge, and she is so astute at being able to connect strings and be able to see exactly what happens when a decision is made, or when an initiative is taken inside of a company, to realize what the ripple effect is on a compliance level. But also on top of that, she's one of the best compliance trainers and educators that I've ever seen. So she really handles that operational component when it comes to the work that we do with licensed operators or even with ancillaries. Really handles it and takes my crazy dreams and hopes and ideas and strategies and makes them feasible and makes them executable, and makes sure again that our clients are always as safe as they can possibly be when they come to their practices.
Very good. So did she get into it at the same time that you did, or who led who down that path?
As far as the industry itself?
Yeah.
We were both in it. We had met. She had been consulting for a few years. She'd actually worked for one of the largest operator in Colorado, and was a compliance trainer, educator, worked many different levels, helped to write a lot of their curriculum. and had left there and gone on her own. So when I met her, she was consulting and working with quite a few clients and variety of clients, but really working heavily around education and helping organizations do trainings. And I was working again mainly along the lines of revenue generation and around market strategy and around just strategic things. So we realized that again, being able to put those two powers together really made something that was unique to the industry, because a lot of times people focus on one thing or they focus on one specific area, but they don't realize everything that, you can, as an example, you can go in and change lights in a facility, but there's a lot of ripple effects that come with just swapping out lights in a facility. There's everything from change management to adoption to appreciation to the mood of to the employees, to what it actually does to your plants. Or, again, just as an example, there's a million things to take into consideration. Having that 360 view of it really gives us the ability to quickly solve and come up with solutions that work the first time.
Sure. And so let's transition our discussion a little bit about your company, okay? On your shirt, it says Indica Consulting. That's, for the record, that is the name of your company.
That is correct. Indica Consulting, yep.
So Indica Consulting is something that you started about, I want to say maybe 3 years ago?
Yeah, 2020, I believe, so about a little over 2 years ago now, yeah.
A little bit over 2 years ago.
Yep.
And so how did you and Car Seat decide, hey, we're going to go down this path and we're going to start our own consulting company?
That's a great question, and it was a very kind of an arduous journey to get.
Well, because you guys both had jobs before.
Yeah.
I mean, where you still concurrently do, but certainly when you came to me and said, hey, Richard, I need help, with X, Y, Z.
I was transitioning. Yeah, I was transitioning out of the,
right, and because we both were involved with Pebble. I was a board member, and you worked there, and so that's how I got to know you. Really, is a little bit more.
Yeah, initially with a
little bit with a little bit more depth. But when you came to me and said, I want to start this consulting company, I really wasn't really sure what kind of consulting company. So. How did you decide what type of consulting services you were going to provide?
It was difficult because there was so many. Well, again, what I kind of dealt with was I was with Pebble, but I was also with a couple other companies, and one of them happened to be a tech company that I was the global head of industry for, and they had wanted to enter into the cannabis industry. So I helped them to do that. I helped them validate and authenticate and kind of help to influence the industry to accept them. And in that role, we happened to serve a purpose of connecting all of the different technology islands and data islands within an organization. And what I started to realize is in working with that company for 3 years, I worked with hundreds of different operators and got to interview and talk to everybody from plant botanists to mad scientists to different levels of operators. But what I realized is there was such a problem with people either selling technologies or solutions or doing things that either weren't compliant or they weren't functional when it came to actually connecting and making an operation more efficient. And I started to realize that there was a lot of predatory nature when it came to how ancillaries operated. And in a lot of cases where somebody will sell something in, do it as fast as they can, slam the trunk, drive away, and you've got an operator who's spent a great deal of money on a solution that doesn't work for them. And what it really started to reopen my eyes to was the fact that operators really needed protection from the predatory nature of a lot of what happens in this industry, which is people come in, they try and take advantage of it, they try to just pillage as fast as they can and make their money and run away. And we were actually compelled by a lot of our peers in our network to say there just needs to be something that can fix this. There's got to be a way to bridge the gap between compliance and revenue, and have a group of people that can come in and do that. And so our peers really were the ones that pushed us and encouraged us to do that. And that's when I had left that technology company and decided that we were going to take on and create Indica. And Indica was really designed to help ethical companies navigate the landmines of the cannabis industry. And again, using our many decades of experience in our network, which we've created, which is called, we've actually put together over 55 different subject matter experts and thought leaders, which is called the Indica Collective. And all of these different experts are able to be brought in fractionally on projects to be able to use think tanks to create fast solution-oriented kind of things with some of the greatest experts of the industry. So that was really what our impetus was to create something that could protect operators, but also help raise the tide for the industry and help ancillary companies operate effectively, bring value, bring ethics, understand what the culture is of the industry, understand how to navigate that, but how to support it and how to become part of it versus being on the outside of it and just trying to take shots in and do those kind of things. So it's kind of both worlds as far as operating with the plant touching businesses and then those that support them.
So I have two questions for you. One, how do you identify someone who's predatory? Just out of curiosity. Give me some characteristics of a company or a group that may be predatory towards one of your clients.
Sure. I could give an example of.
Don't name any names.
No names at all. I had a gentleman or a group that was designing a facility.
Okay.
And they had reached out and said, hey, we're thinking about doing this. By the way, here's our layout. And I looked and I saw, I want to say at least 27 problems just initially with opening up the document and seeing what the floor plan was. Everything from a bathroom opening up to a flower room to a this to a that, which instantly any person in the industry that has any sense of whatever should go, oh, this all needs to, there's a lot of things you need to fix. 11 different ancillary companies put in bids and put a full product and all these things as far as pitches to them saying this is ready to go after looking at their layouts, and not one of them said a word about the problems that they were going to have from a compliance standpoint, from even an installation standpoint, from any of those kind of things. And in all of that, I knew all of those 11 companies, and I happened to know that I dealt with those 11 companies and had similar situations in different projects throughout the years. This guy just happened to find all 11 of them all at one time and it happened to pick up all. But one example, the first example I would say is when a ancillary company is more interested in their own well-being and interested in making a sale than doing it for the benefit of what their client does. It's so important to be bringing value to the client and making sure that the client is going to succeed versus just trying to, again, offload a sale and do that for the sake of, the sale.
So, I mean, I'm just thinking this through my head is that for an average operator, if they are unable to identify these predatory practices, that's a lot of financial loss, wouldn't you say?
Huge financial loss. And Forbes had put out maybe a couple of years ago that I believe 84% of digital transformation projects, initiatives fail. When you talk about the cannabis industry, it's higher than that. That equates to billions of dollars across the course of the last decade that have been wasted, thrown away on hopes, dreams. That's why, again, operators are so skeptical now. Sales cycles for ancillary companies are so long because it takes so much validation and so much social proof and so much trust before an operator will say, okay, we'll go with your solution. And that, again, has to do with a lot of years of just unscrupulous practices of just trying to get as much money out of these operators and run away from them as they possibly can.
Okay, so you've used the word solutions a couple of times now in your rhetoric. So let's talk about that. To me, solutions is a very broad term.
It is, very much.
Okay, it's a very broad term. Are we talking about operational solutions, administrative solutions? Are we talking about business strategies? Are we talking about strategic planning? Are we talking about marketing, business development? What type of solutions do you think that, if I were to ask you, Travis, what are you guys really good at?
We are very, we touch on all of those again because of our collective. We can bring in resources to work on a lot of different things for our client. But really what our focus is on, where we really shine is between, again, creating a revenue generation plan or strategy and being able to execute through that. So that can include sales, marketing, market validation, just any of those kind of areas, and then the operational components to be able to execute it. If I was going to say, what do? We focus on the two big problems to what I talked about earlier as far as project failures is the lack of alignment and the lack of change management. Our industry has been, in a legacy sense, been around a long time. In a current model sense, is evolving all the time. You're dealing with so many different challenges of like you mentioned earlier, compliance in this jurisdiction versus that jurisdiction, and in your jurisdiction it might change overnight because of who knows what happens. But again, when you do that, you need to have the alignment of not just are we in agreement inside of an organization, not just are we in agreement that we're going to do this project, but having all the different resources in place and knowing what those resources are going to be, knowing what those landmines are going to be. Again, that's one of the big values that we bring is having been through so much in all of the different things that we've worked on. We've seen what works and what doesn't work, and we know what the reality is when you're going to do something like this, but there's this little thing and this little thing and this little thing, and all of that's going to do. An example would be changing latex gloves at a dispensary. We had a client that decided to go from black gloves to light colored gloves because they were slightly cheaper. It made economic sense. The amount of kickback from the staff having to wear these ugly gloves versus having black created such a morale drop, created such an anger thing for so long that it was a bad operational change to say they stepped over dollars to make pennies, and realized that again, just in that situation, there was something where the ripple effect of making a decision, while economically it might make sense to save an extra $7,500 a year or something, the detriment to what it caused was something they wouldn't have foreseen. But
No, I can totally relate. I see that all the time. Even with what I do with legal services,
Sure.
people or businesses refuse to spend $2,000-$3,000, and then on the back end they incur something that's more detrimental. That's they have to incur 10, 20 times that.
Exactly.
Right? That's interesting about the gloves example. Is that in an adult use dispensary, or is that in a medical dispensary, or what type of dispensary is
It was actually a split dispensary. They did both medical and recreational. So,
okay.
but yeah, that was.
I mean, that's something very small and nuanced. You wouldn't really even think about it, but you mentioned morale. So, what other aspects in the daily operations would impact, say, staff morale, or what other small items like that would have a ripple effect, as you alluded to earlier?
Oh, it can be. There's a lot of things. I mean, it could be something as small as, let's say, maybe the software that they're using. The software company decides to move a button on the screen that changes their workflow. All of a sudden, somebody can go from really liking something to I hate this software, and all of a sudden there becomes an entire mood around the entire organization that they happen to absolutely dislike this. Well, all of a sudden they stop using it now. Well, now you're putting yourself into a situation of maybe you're at a compliance risk, or maybe things aren't getting documented the right way, or all of these different things. That little ripple effect of having a vendor decide to change something slightly without understanding what that ripple effect could be for an organization. It can touch on a lot of different things.
Is it a fair statement to say that having your clients comply with what you consult or what you advise is pretty critical?
I like to think
because you can't really force them to do anything, right?
No,
your job is to say, hey, this is the problem. We've identified the gap. We've identified the deficiencies. This is the plan that you need to exercise in order to move forward. They don't always comply, do they?
No, and that's part of what communication and trust is so important to build.
Sure.
Because you could have the best idea or the worst idea or whatever it is, but if whoever you're working with doesn't feel that doesn't trust it, they don't implement it, or they implement a third of what you suggest, and then they get frustrated that they didn't get the results that they wanted to. So we, a lot of times, and across the board, when we work with people, we spend a great deal of time on the front end, having the time to really build that understanding and really, again, articulating out the whys of why you do certain things, not just the because, not just the trust me, this is going to work, but being able to do that and also having the reasoning behind it, explaining those. What it really comes down to is asking questions that are difficult that most people don't ask. I ask a lot of questions, and our teams ask a lot of questions of our clients that maybe our clients don't like answering or haven't even thought of. And that, I think, is where, when we're able to help them think through some of that stuff, I think that helps them feel, instead of being two people on opposite sides of a table, we move to the same side of the table and we're taking on a project together. And that's where, and along the way, it becomes difficult. It becomes easier we're not going to do this part. We're going to do that. That becomes that's our specialty, is making sure people stay on task, stay with what it is, and execute across the board. That's the change management part, is because if there isn't adoption of the solution, if there's only partial adoption, if there isn't the resources to do it, if there isn't a plan for it, and a way to implement. Again, I use software as an example, but if you put in a software and the team doesn't enjoy it, or it becomes an obstacle, or it's something along those lines, it becomes a detriment. And it's not about if you're spending $5,000 or $500,000 on what it is. It has to do with, is what this is doing actually benefiting your business in a positive way?
So, other than non-compliance, what else would you say makes a client kind of a nightmare client for you? Be candid.
One of the things, like you'd mentioned, is not following through with what the plans are. One of the things also is, I would say, the lack of transparency when you're trying to solve a problem. If you cannot get to the point of really finding out what is going on, and you're getting answered the spurious type of information, it makes it really difficult to solve it. And a lot of times in the industry, people, their egos or their embarrassment, don't like to say, we're scared, we're afraid, we've screwed up, we don't know how to solve it. And they try and come, or they're in the middle of something and they don't acknowledge that something has happened, and all of a sudden you find out a week later or 2 weeks later that, oh, well, this did happen 2 weeks ago. It's like, had you told us that hour, we would have had a completely different path. Now you're in triage. Now you're trying to fix stuff. And it ends, like we talked earlier, making a decision like that ends up costing so much more in the long run. And we're very, very good. We are not an inexpensive solution, but we are a very, very valuable solution that has always ended up being a positive for every one of our clients thus far, thankfully. But being able to do it right within a budget that fits somebody's organization saves them so much in the long run as far as long-term problems.
Have you ever had a client encounter a problem, you give them a solution, they implemented it, they didn't like the results, they fire you, but then later on they actually got worse results and they had to rehire you back? Has that ever happened?
Absolutely, it has.
Okay.
I've seen that.
To me, that is actually one. To me, that would be kind of a nightmare client.
It can be very difficult. It's also satisfying to realize that, it helps build that bond, and it actually builds the trust. So that it can be a really, really frustrating period of time going through that while it's happening. But that brings it back around to when they go, oh, whoops, they really did have our best interest at heart, and they come back and they realize, we're going to follow what you say now, because it did work before. We tried to do it on our way. We had one at MJ Biz that had come back around to us and had said, yeah, we really, really made a mistake thinking we could do this on our own. We really need you back as soon as possible. So we're going back to help work with them.
So give me an example of the type of clients you usually work with, or because as we said earlier, it's a supply chain driven industry. Mm-hmm. So you have everything from cultivators to processors to retailers and everything in between, and transportation companies and so forth. Where along the supply chain do you usually play in?
We actually operate, well, with the plant touching businesses, we provide services for all areas, actually. One of the initial services that we tend to bring and that people take advantage of is we provide metric training. Metric is the software for the industry that is the track and trace for, I think, 32 states right now. Very, very crucial. It's the backbone of compliance across those. But unfortunately, that company doesn't have really any training available other than some videos. And people have learned to operate that software, one of the most important softwares, by figuring it out on their own, or maybe doing it wrong, or figuring it out from somebody before them who did it wrong and trained them. But we, for the first time, have created an instructor-led metric training program that people are actually able to be in, learn things. So we work with cultivators, processors, retail, transportation, any of those type of things. Anybody, law groups, enterprise organizations, small organizations, but everybody who needs that training. is able to come in and experience that. From there, from the plant side, we tend to focus on cultivation, processing, and retail, mainly because that happens to be a lot of the experience within our team, but at the same time, too, those tend to be the most needed areas where there's so many problems or challenges or those kind of things. Kind of bring that around when we go to the ancillary side, we spend a great deal of time trying to make sure that they don't, again, create a ripple effect with that type of that side of the thing that causes a lot of problems.
So when you got this company started, Indica, by the way, who named it? I'm just curious.
We did actually at the same moment. We were one night. It was late at night, and we were looking up just URLs, and we discovered that this one happened to be available, and we happened to discover that somebody had it years and years and years ago for a completely separate business long outside of cannabis, and we thought we wanted to use that name, but we never thought in the world that the URL would be available, and we happened to grab it. It was there. It was fantastic. We actually had we bought it, and the next day we talked to GoDaddy to get some stuff set up, and the broker of that said, "How in the world how could this have possibly been available? This is insane." So, but that was kind of, the inception was very much a hope, dream, and a lucky thing where we did a search online and found that it was something we could do.
How fortuitous.
Yeah.
So tell me about some of the challenges and what were some of the steps that you took to start your consulting company? Because I want people who are listening to this to understand both the good, bad, and ugly, and the hard work you had to put in to get this started, right?
Yeah, it is not an easy journey. Again, starting out anything when you are going on your own or starting out something as an organization, you're talking long days, lots of stress, lots of worry. When you talk about trying to do that inside the cannabis industry, multiply that times 10 because there's so many challenges. The first thing that we did was actually contact you.
Okay.
That was one of the, because again, as far as anything that we do, we live in the world of doing it right and doing it compliantly. We do not cut corners, and we do not take risks. I mean, we can't be compliance experts and operational experts and do something wrong. So the first thing was to talk to you about it.
Okay.
And that's where we looked at what are our risks, what are our challenges, what does the lay of the land look like for a business like ours? Right. And are we, by being blatantly open about what we do as far as operating the cannabis industry, what type of liability are we putting ourselves at from a business standpoint? As far as getting credit card processing or getting, our insurance company is going to talk to us, all those kind of things that came to be. And but the first thing that we wanted to have was excellent legal representation, because that's something that I recommend to every one of my clients and every single person that I talk to, is that if you're going to operate in this business and have a company in this business, you need to have legal representation, because of, again, you could speak to this far better than I can, but all of the myriads of challenges from a legal standpoint. The next thing was kind of looking at how do we put together the infrastructure of our organization and do it in a quick way that is needing to be nimble, because an organization, when you first start out, needs to be able to flex around. Our industry alone changes so much that you have to be able to pivot, sometimes on a dime, and sometimes within a week have to change things and have different plans. But we needed to have something where we had enough organization to take on what we know was going to be an influx of clients and folks just from our network alone, because we knew how many people were going to be reaching out to us. So getting that type of data and organization able to make sure that when we did manage projects or take on clients or things like that, that we had a through line that really carried us from inception of a project all the way to the end, and making sure that we're able to do all the things that are necessary, and having the same thing we would do with our clients, making sure we had every single needed resource available, identified, and within grasp when needed to be able to kind of accomplish what those goals were. And the third thing I would say is not giving up, because that founder roller coaster, or the founder sine wave that people talk about, as far as ups, downs, ins and outs, boy, you will feel it in the cannabis industry. And some days I question what I'm doing, some days I love what I'm doing, but there's always that when it comes to going, starting out a business and trying to do that. And it's something where over the course of a year or two, you will have those ups and downs, and you need to stick strong and really believe in what you're doing, and find, again, when you are struggling, you need to find the resources and the support for yourself, for your organization, and being candid, saying, I need help. And again, one of the challenges that our clients, it takes a long time for them to be able to admit it sometimes. But getting somebody to say, I need help, or myself saying I need help and finding the resources to do it, that's something that's just crucial to being able to succeed.
So did you experience any banking challenges or any of those payment processing challenges that we talked about? Or tell me about some of the operational challenges that you had.
It's been a very, very unique challenge as far as banking and payment processing, all of those type of areas. Luckily, again, you were a resource that helped us find our banking.
Oh, good.
With,
I'm glad.
That was again another reason why you were so crucial for us. But we went through multiple banks and across the country trying to speak to folks, banks that we've worked with. Even looking at trying to explain to banks that at one point we were considering maybe we'll just operate with hemp and not touch cannabis, that side. And even with hemp operators, even though it's federally illegal, even though the Farm Bill made it, banks still wouldn't touch it. Credit unions still wouldn't want to touch it. We found a bank that's fabulous and supported us. But then our next challenge was payment processing.
Yeah.
Being able to take payments not only from a licensed operator but from ancillary companies. Was a daunting task, and what was actually uniquely enough, we just recently solved that problem. But what was interesting enough was that in talking to the payment processors, it was not so much the cannabis-related situation as much as it was a consulting situation that was a concern.
Okay.
Because unbeknownst to a lot of things, that putting those two hands together, unless you have an exact description of what a service is, like I'm selling this one little thing. Well, consulting's not always like that. Consulting's a project. Sometimes consulting can be open-ended hours, sometimes those kind of things. And learning that double whammy of being a consultant along with being in the cannabis industry really, really tightened up a lot of people's interest as far as being able to provide services. And that's where we would have these conversations with payment processing companies. Literally, we teach companies how to be compliant, how not to do that.
Right.
And they would go, that sounds wonderful. Unfortunately, can't do anything with it. And so, yeah, it was a big challenge to try to solve that. That kept us up a lot of nights trying to figure those things out, because we would have clients that, would need to make payments of 5 figures and, need to run a credit card and need to be able to do those kind of things. And all of a sudden, when you can't do that, that's a real big struggle for a small organization to make sure that you're able to fulfill that need. Getting paid is really important. So,
Speaking of which, have you guys ever been sniffed?
yeah.
You have?
Mm-hmm.
And what did you do about that?
We had a good conversation with that client. It was not something where they were trying to. They ran into some challenges on their end. Again, they'd gone away from what we'd suggested to do. They took a couple gambles, lost their butt on it. But what we did was we turned it around into a positive and actually worked on case studies and a lot of mutual kind of support that would help to offset what the loss was. But that's a risk all the time, especially in this industry, because companies can come and go really quickly. It's very difficult to enforce contracts in a lot of ways. It's difficult to collect money when an operator doesn't have a banking account because they're storing everything in a vault. How do you try and acquire and go after situations like that, or with an ancillary company? Sometimes you kind of have to look at what matters more. Is it that amount of money, or is it what you can actually, again, most of the time when I've ever dealt with that in other careers or other areas, is having the conversation with that, coming to a solution that mutually benefits everybody versus trying to hammer down on something or walk away and, kick the dirt. That's never a fun thing to do.
You, as a consulting company, do you ever take upfront retainer fees?
Nope.
Upfront? Okay.
Absolutely, yeah. That's about half. Well, again, half of our business is working with ancillaries. The other half is with plant operators.
Yeah.
When we're operating, we do offer a service. It's called the Virtual Vice President. It's a fractional service where we can come in and step in and help with strategy, operations, compliance at a fractional level. That helps small and mid-level businesses be able to have an expertise without having, a six-figure kind of payroll to have a chief marketing officer, a chief sales officer, something like that. But in those situations, yeah, we set up a retainer relationship, or it's typically what we try and always do is have, payment or things like that in advance of what the services are. Not always, it can't always work like that. And that again comes to be trust as far as our clients as we go along. If things need to be adjusted or things like that, and everything's been moving well, we get flexible. So
Yeah. So let's pivot a little bit and talk about the industry itself.
Yeah.
Right? We've talked about you serving the plant touching industry. It sounds like to me, I don't want to make any assumptions, but it sounds like you do some work in perhaps Oklahoma and outside of Texas, right?
Oh, yeah, most of our work is around the country. We do some within Texas, but we actually split time between Denver and Austin, Texas, as far as but yeah, yep, all over.
Okay. So in your opinion, this is obviously just through Travis's perspective. How do you think the industry has changed over time since you've been involved? Now, granted, you got involved on the legacy side, and it's been a while. But let's just say in the last 10 to 15 years, how do you see how have you seen the industry evolve and change, and how do you see it continuing to change that takes us into that next generation?
Initially, and you look back at, let's just go back to, let's say 20, we don't have to go back 10 or 15 years, we can go back 6 years, 7 years.
Right, because it changes at light speed, right? So,
but in, like as an example, in 2015 or 2016, working with cultivators and looking at technology, everything had always been done underground. Nobody really shared experience. You couldn't really document processes, and that was literally a felony waiting to happen if you documented what you did as far as your grow. But starting when the legal side came to be and operators were able to start exploring technologies or exploring, or again, receiving massive funds and then having this investment to go out and spend, I would have conversations with chief operating officers that had received $100 million in investment, and they would read something that I'd written, and they go, "You keep talking about this ROI thing. What is this ROI thing?" ROI? Oh, you're a chief operating officer of an organization that has $100 million in your war chest, and you don't know what ROI means. Okay, this is scary. That's evolved where people are getting much more business savvy and much more understandable along those lines. One of the things that hasn't changed, and we're feeling it right now in the industry, is with a big downturn in cannabis prices, wholesale cannabis prices, it's put a real pain on the industry. While a lot of the operators that haven't spent the time focusing on their data or focusing on being efficient in what they do are feeling extreme pains right now. If they're growing and they're trying, it's costing them $1,500 to grow a pound of product, and on the market it's going for $1,200. Obviously, that's not sustainable. It's not feasible. So seeing people go from just spend whatever they want to and who cares because cannabis is going to sell for a lot of money, to actually having to right now really get efficient and really focus on things, that's a big thing that's changed. But I think one of the things that I've seen is that over the course of, again, 5, 6, 7 years, so many companies came in, venture-backed companies or whatnot, came in and tried to be so big so fast, and thinking that by being big, they were going to be able to own the market or take over the market or do those kind of things. And we've seen organization after organization after organization of these large sizes that didn't have the expertise, didn't respect the culture, didn't necessarily even tap into the history of the legacy industry to do those things, really crash and burn. Canada is a great example of a lot of those major companies are dwindling and dwindling when you watch the stock prices, when you look at their statements as far as valuation and where they're at right now. And what I think I'm seeing and what I really appreciate seeing is that there's a new renaissance and appreciation for the craft grower and the artisan type product, and especially in the last year and a half, maybe 2 years, but where there's a newfound respect from what is the current legal industry to all of a sudden looking and realizing that these folks that had built and created the industry to begin with and really done that they're no longer being pushed to the side as inconsequential or inconvenient. They're realizing that bringing in that talent, bringing in that knowledge, bringing in that skill set changes the way their businesses operate. But I love seeing that the small farmer creating a really high quality product is being able to differentiate themselves on the market, or the processor or the retail that creates an experience that is unique, is really being able to create something that is business sustainable for themselves, and they can be profitable and they can do that. But that has to do with being being what makes them wonderful and being able to identify and articulate that out. And I think that that's one of the exciting things that I see is that the industry didn't just fall into the hands of the largest, biggest thing that can make the most at the same time. It became something where there still is the craft quality of what it is. And, you know, that's really exciting to me.
You know, it's interesting because I've talked to different types of people and, you know, different groups within the industry. And, you know, you talk to one group, which are the people who have the capital and have very little institutional knowledge of the industry. And then conversely, you talk to the people who do have that knowledge. And it's really a good marriage if they can make it work. Right?
I completely agree.
It's a really good marriage if they can make it work. The problem is making it work. And one side thinks the other side doesn't have the institutional knowledge, but they do have the capital. Conversely, the capital side look at the legacy people or the people who have the industry knowledge that may lack the capital or maybe some level of sophistication. But I think it's really important if both sides can realize they kind of need each other.
Very much so.
And if they can make each other better, it makes the industry better. That's really what we need, in my opinion. But getting there can be challenging.
Absolutely, it can be. Yeah.
So it sounds like you've worked with grow cultivators, you've worked with retailers, processors. Have you worked with the hemp industry in Texas, along with just the products that's kind of spinning off of that market, such as your beverages or your candies and different hemp cannabinoid based products? Is that something you get involved with?
It is, and it's not only just in Texas, but across the country. And it's been a very wild, you know, year or two as far as, like you said, some of the spin-off products, some of the things that have come to the market. Delta 8 is a big, you know, conversation, looking at creating edibles that have Delta 9 THC based off of weight. That's a whole big thing that, you know, has been a challenge for people realizing. All of a sudden you could buy a 25 milligram edible as long as it's sized up large enough to do that, as long as it's made from hemp. Well, that changed the game in a lot of ways. And all of a sudden you're relying on, when you're talking about doing those kind of things from a compliance standpoint, a lot of those first movers that did that took big risks and still are taking risks in some senses with you know, pushing those products out. Minnesota happens to be a state where they've articulatedly legalized Delta 9 hemp, and that, you know, changed some things. Other states, Texas, kind of, you know, is trying to figure that out still as far as understanding that. But when you look at it from a compliance standpoint, there's hemp has this really unique kind of trouble, which is there's not a tremendous amount of money within hemp itself. So people, not to say get desperate, but they get creative when it comes to how do I sell my product? How do I figure that kind of thing out? And the biggest concern that I see with the hemp market that we work with is making sure operators don't cut corners when it comes to making sure you have a safe product and a tested and true product, and making sure that.
And how do you do that? Because the variation of the products in the market is so broad.
It is, and the variation.
There's some really good ones, and there's some, quite frankly, really bad ones.
Well, and there's that comes down to a lot of, well, that's such a huge, how do you fix the hemp industry?
That's
problem?
A loaded question, isn't it?
Huge problem.
Yeah.
One of the biggest challenges is and it's becoming very, very openly discussed now, especially if anybody's on LinkedIn, but looking at testing fraud, understanding that there are labs that do great work. There are labs that don't do great work. There are labs that do great, that have the best intentions of doing great work, and they can't live up to it a lot of times. The methodologies or you could have the same product tested by the same lab and have 3 different results sometimes, and that has to do with technology needing to catch up. That's one of the first things, is that testing has to be there. Right. Another big thing is that state by state versus federal run standards and compliance and things like that. We've got to sort that out. It's got to be figured out. It can't live. The entire world lives in the gray area still. So trying to live within stay within the borders of whatever is legal when there really aren't borders around it becomes something really, really difficult to do for people. So there's a lot that needs to be kind of changed and sorted through, and I think again we need a unified hemp industry to help motivate those changes, and I think it requires those good operators to raise the tide for themselves, stand up. You know, again, one of the things about Pebble as an example is that we had higher standards and still have higher standards than almost any hemp operator that I know of. I mean, having pharmaceutical level variances, having triple testing, having all of those kind of things, that had nothing to do with regulations. That had to do with what our ethics were and our standards were and requiring.
Well, I mean, that's the difference between what's mandated and best practices in the culture of a company.
It is.
So, I mean, those are two very different issues, right? So I'm going to push the envelope a little bit. I'm going to push it a little bit further. What do you know about products in the hemp cannabinoid industry that uses spray on, but the cannabinoid isn't really hemp derived?
Oh yeah, that happens.
This is a dirty little rumor.
It's.
But can you? I don't want you to verify with any names, obviously. But tell me. Let's talk a little bit about that.
It happens. As an example, smokable flower gets a lot of times what people are doing. Taking hemp, spraying it, like you said, with a Delta 8 or a Delta 9 product. A lot of times what you're seeing is even cannabis that is just badly grown being sprayed and called hemp and having false.
That's the one I'm talking about.
That happens.
Because then what's happening, if you think about it, if you're doing the spray on with just cannabis that's not defined as hemp, which is essentially marijuana under the Controlled Substances Act, then you're using spray-on cannabinoids derived from an illegal substance onto what is portrayed as a federally legal substance because you're calling it hemp cannabinoids, when in actuality, it may not have derived from hemp.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So again, I'm just a lawyer. I want to hear from the expert, but that is a dirty little rumor that goes around.
It is happening. I've been aware of that, and it's one of the. Honestly, I think one of the worst things that's going on in the industry. Part of it is just safety, not knowing what the quality is, and those operators that are doing that typically are those that are cutting corners, and they're not necessarily making sure it is the most pure, safe kind of product that's on there. So you're dealing with pesticides, you're dealing with all sorts of different after effects of creating a concentrate that's sprayed onto something. That concentrates not just the THC quality, but it concentrates the heavy metals. It concentrates those things. If you're not paying attention to those things, then you're creating something that can cause a lot of damage for people.
Sure.
So.
Well, we're approaching an hour, so let's get down to it. This is the lightning round. What's next for Travis, Carsey, and Indica?
What's next? Yeah. Well, like I mentioned, we launched recently the metric training program, and we're going to be expanding that quite a bit. Very excited about that. We're actually working directly with Metric and several other operators several other ancillaries to help push that across the industry and create that. But one of the big exciting things we're working on is creating the Indica Consulting Research Center. And what we're looking to do, and we've actually done our proof of concept initially this past year, but what we are looking to create initially is a cultivation technology solution evaluation center, 10,000 square feet, that would allow different chambers to be able to not only validate and vet technology, but help to create technology recipes that will actually be able to be implementable in an instant way, instead of an operator having to understand and figure out 30 different moving parts and trying to make it and taking them 3 years to get their grow room to actually grow like they wanted to, or their processing to actually operate. Having a turnkey SOP that comes in. Having this facility would give operators the ability to have a unique kind of space to test something out without disrupting their operations. But on the other end, kind of a Consumer Reports meets Hort America's idea is for the ancillary companies that struggle. Again, we talked earlier on about the long sales cycles, or trying to build trust, or trying to prove what they can do. There's so much promise and very little proof when it comes from ancillaries that try to sell into there. We want to be able to help them prove out their solutions and be able to do that and help them understand not only what the real factors are that happen inside of a cultivation or inside of a product. Again, we plan on starting with cultivation, and then creating a processing, and then creating a retail area. But initially being able to do that, but helping those ancillaries not only understand that, but understand those ripple effects and those change management effects that they need to go in and be able to speak to their clients about before they're taking on projects, and be able to really come in and do a better job of supporting that part of the industry.
Okay, very good. Well, Travis, it was so wonderful talking to you. I think this is the most you and I have talked in a long time.
I think so, yeah. As far
So
as being able to
I'm
sit
glad
down
we
and-
had a chance to catch up, and thank you for making the drive up to Dallas for this podcast. And on behalf of the Sativa segment, we thank you.
Thank you, Richard. This has been
All
fantastic.
right, good talking to you.